Are you ready to break free from a conventional life and achieve financial independence through your version of tiny living, but you're feeling stuck trying to figure out the money part? Does the pressure to conform to societal norms make it even more difficult to embrace an unconventional lifestyle? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Laura Lynch, host of the Less House, More Moolah podcast, where every Thursday I'll bring you captivating interviews with individuals who have successfully made the transition to tiny living. They defied expectations and are thriving in their unique lives. We'll also dive deep into industry resources to address common financial concerns on your tiny journey. Together, we'll explore the emotional and practical aspects of pursuing an alternative lifestyle. I will describe a clear framework for project planning and cash flow management. Our goal is to intentionally build financial security and make a positive impact through our alternative American dream. So gear up for an exciting and empowering journey to create a life that truly resonates with you. Let's dive into today's episode and take the first steps towards financial independence and purpose through tiny living. Ethan Waldman, thank you for joining the Less House, More Moolah podcast. I'm super excited to talk to you today.
Hey, Laura, glad to be here.
So listeners, Ethan Waldman is maybe a little bit of czar of tiny houses. It seems like he's got the entire empire, the blog, the podcast, the books, the guidance, the multimedia experience to teach you how to get through the process, and especially around building, which I think is really valuable because we are very focused on sweat equity in my household and really adding value through our own work. So I'm so glad that you provide that guidance to people so that they can build their own sweat equity.
Yep.
Good. Well, we'll get to all the places that folks can follow you here at the end. But I definitely wanted to talk to you about kind of your history and also your ways of sort of pivoting into tiny, and then the way that you've actually turned that into a business, because I think so many people that are considering tiny living are thinking about how they can shift other parts of their life to align more with their values. And so often that involves entrepreneurship, as it has for you and I. So I'm super excited about that. So if you would, Ethan, would you share with the listeners your backstory, where you came from, and how a tiny house became a goal for you?
Yeah, let's do it. So let's see. I think I first saw tiny houses sometime in like late 2011, early 2012. I think I was exposed to it through Tammy Strobel and her blog, Rowdy Kittens. Her and her husband, Logan, bought or actually hired Dee Williams when Dee had a construction company. And it was one of Dee's first kind of builds for a client was their tiny house. But my backstory is that I graduated from college in 2007, right before the huge mortgage, bust, housing crisis. And so I kind of graduated into a rough job market, and I was lucky to get a job. And, but I kind of witnessed this turmoil in the housing market all around me. And I think it really kind of colored my feelings about home ownership. And I know it did the same for a lot of people my age, just seeing people kind of lose their homes and be underwater and all that. So with that kind of as the backstory, I was a couple of years into my corporate career, and I wasn't really enjoying the lifestyle, being in a frigid, air-conditioned office, not seeing the outside. And I was living in Vermont already. And this is such an outdoorsy place. This is like, and it's also like, when it's nice here, it's incredible, but like most of the time it's not that nice. So like you have to be available to kind of catch that powder day and go skiing, or to like go hiking on that beautiful summer day. And I was just feeling like the corporate grind was not helping me live the life that I wanted to live. And I had already explored and was on the entrepreneurship path. I had an online business called Cloud Coach. And the idea is that I would work with small business owners to help them use technology in their businesses. And it was going okay, but it certainly wasn't, replacing my job's salary in any way. And so, it almost felt like I had these like two slider knobs. Like it's like I could try to raise up my income until it met my expenses, or I could just lower my expenses until it met my income. And the idea of building a tiny house on wheels, it just kind of clicked at some point for me that like, wow, I could do this with the savings I have on hand. At the time, I thought that I could do it for about $25,000. Of course, these are 2010, 2011, 2012 numbers. This is all, very different now. You might want to just double anything that you hear me say. And, I would do it myself, which was something that I also had always I always just knew that I was going to build my own house at some point. And so I saved up. I'd already had some savings, but I really set a goal to do it. And, I ended up leaving my job June of 2012. And I think I picked up my trailer the same day as my last day of work. And yeah, maybe that's a start to the story.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that analogy of the levers or the switches or however you phrase it, because that is true in life, right? Most of us can't have everything. And so you have to kind of figure out what your compromise points are going to be. And oftentimes people get stuck in that treadmill of increase, income, and don't think about that other thing that's reducing your overall cost of living, which gives you more freedom when those things are in equilibrium.
Yeah. And that's, you also see, like, I have nothing against, standard size houses. But I think that the problem is that you fill the space that you are in. And so I think that there's a tendency to increase expenses, increase purchases to kind of meet whatever level of income you're making. And so that's how you can, have people living in $1 million houses, but still they're also broke. They're also living paycheck to paycheck. And so, you could do it in tiny houses too, but I think that, a tiny house in some ways forces you to live, a little bit more minimalist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I often talk about in our household, right? Do you own the stuff or does the stuff own you?
Right.
And, that's what happens is the bigger and bigger package that we have, the more the culture around purchasing kind of drives you to always be adding more stuff. And then that kind of takes away from anything else you want to accomplish. So you built your own. So what did you learn through that building experience?
Oh my gosh. I mean, so much. I learned the physical skills, certainly. I learned about the importance of keeping a budget. I didn't do a very good job of like estimating the cost of the build and, saying, I knew an overall number, but I didn't have a good sense of like, okay, this is what the flooring is going to cost. This is what the roofing is going to cost. And so like, I kind of just like kept splurging on things like standing seam roof or like, cherry floors or Doug fir cabinets, all these like nice things. And so the build ended up costing a bit more than I had budgeted at first. And, I was really lucky because I was essentially able to continue working for the company that I worked for, but as a consultant rather than as an employee. So I basically continued to fund the project, with what I was making.
Yeah. And so you learned the skills and you learned about budgeting. Anything else that you learned about yourself?
What I learned about myself. I think it overall was a really confidence boosting experience. I can be scattered. I have a lot of interests. I can move from one project to another kind of before one is finished, moved on to the next. And the tiny house was probably like the biggest single project that I've ever done, 13, 14 months of work. And, I think the motivation for that in a lot of ways is like, until you're done with the house, you've laid out a lot of money, but like you don't really have something that's worth anything until you can actually live in it.
Yeah, I too found a lot of confidence boosting. Once you've built your own house, you feel
Mhm.
like you can pretty much do anything, right? Because
Yeah,
you can take care of yourself at that level. And I think it also just teaches you like one little bite at a time, just
sure.
one day showing up over and over again. Awesome. So your friends and family watched you do this during a time when it was kind of, a rare idea. That was back in a time when it wasn't all over
Yeah.
HGTV. So what were they saying to you?
People, my friends and family were really supportive of the idea. And I'm grateful for that because as you said, this was not a time when tiny houses were mainstream. When you said tiny house to someone, they didn't understand what that was. I mean, now you say tiny house and most people are like, oh yeah, I've seen the shows. Like they have a picture in their mind. I'm grateful that people were supportive because I think that if there had been any big detractors in my life, it might have talked me out of it. But I think that especially at the time, it was an easy sell. It's kind of like, I'm going to build this thing that I can live in. I think I figured my payoff was like, if I could live in it for 2 to 3 years, then I would recoup the rent that I would have spent otherwise. So it just didn't feel like that big of a risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Yeah, family support is really important. So you were getting questions from folks all during this, which kind of sparked some of the idea around what you do today. What kind of questions were you getting from people?
I mean, I was getting a lot of technical questions. I started a Facebook. Well, actually, I started a blog. I registered the domain that I still have, the tinyhouse.net. And I was following Macy Miller at the time. We were kind of neck and neck in our builds. And she was doing just a wonderful job of documenting her build. And I was like, I'm going to do that. But I quickly figured out that writing, I think I'm a decent writer, but I'm slow and it's really energy intensive. And so writing a daily blog about the work that I had done on the house, it just was not working for me. So I created a Facebook page and I just started posting, basic photo, construction progress and updates. And by the time I was done building, that page had over 5,000 likes and I wasn't doing any intentional promotion of it. This was, of course, at a time when having a Facebook page with a lot of likes actually meant something. But I would get a lot of questions through Facebook, why, a lot of why questions. Why did you choose this type of insulation over a different insulation? What is that house wrap that you put on? Why are you doing this? How are you doing that? And so I saw that there was a lot of need for just a very logical progression through the decision-making process. And so, it was a couple of years later that I think I released Tiny House Decisions, the first edition, in September of 2014. So I guess I had been in the house for, close to 2 years at that point, but I certainly worked on the book probably for a year and a half. And the idea is that it is a guide that helps you through the planning process. It's not really a construction manual per se, because I was and am an amateur builder, and so I don't try to get into the technical things, but I do think I do a really great job of helping people go through and say, okay, what size, what type of house, what construction method, what insulation, what hot water heater, those kinds of things. All those systems, all that planning, that is quite a lot of decision making for any house.
Yeah. Yeah. We have this term that, floats around in the world these days, decision overload.
Yeah.
And that I can see how people could get mired in analysis paralysis, especially when you don't have any context, having never done it before. It's probably really hard. People have a hard time kind of moving forward with their decisions because they don't feel any self-efficacy around making construction related decisions.
Yep.
So they have to have, someone to kind of partner with them on that journey. So you have the book, and then what are all the other ways that you're helping the tiny living community?
Well, I would say the main way that the main thing that I give to the tiny house movement and community is my show, which is the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. It's a weekly interview show that I've been doing since March of 2018. So we're in our 5th year. I don't think I've ever missed a week. So there's at the time of this recording, 272 episodes of the show covering just about every topic that I've come up with. And I'm always looking for suggestions. Have you had somebody on the show who converted a giant potato into a tiny house? I'm like, yes, actually I have. Yeah.
That's awesome. So what's the best story from all of your interviews or people that you've known or worked with?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. It's hard to say. I interviewed this couple a year ago that basically live in a tiny house that's on a floating dock in the middle of like a reservoir. And the house is tethered to the shore with 2 like long ropes, but they have to take a boat to get to it. And it's the coolest thing ever. But so like things like that, just really unique living situations are kind of ones that inspire me.
Yeah, for sure. It's like they have a giant moat around them.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So do you think it's easier for folks today to get started with this or to build their house than it was when you did it?
Yeah, I do. In addition to my resources, there's so much out there. I mean, there are countless builds on YouTube. Like you can watch someone build a tiny house from start to finish on YouTube. Mm-hmm. There are more educational resources. There are way more professional builders. So, for somebody who isn't interested in building their own house, there are way more options. And then there's also kind of intermediary options. There are shells that you can buy. So essentially the outside is finished, but you finish the inside. There are used tiny houses you can purchase. Mm-hmm. When I did mine, there was only one company like selling plans, which was Tumbleweed Tiny Houses. And now, there's just countless plan sets. So there's a lot of resources out there, and it is easier to get started. I do think that the one biggest challenge now is that I think the costs have gone up, and they've gone up faster than inflation. Sure, you could take my $25,000 in 2012 dollars, and I'm sure with inflation, it's probably more like 35 now. Mm-hmm. But the cost of construction materials, the availability and cost of professional builders, all of that have gone up quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like the legal landscape too is a big challenge. And you address some of that in the tiny house parking book that you have. And I think that's just moving so fast, and there's so much changing all the time that you really have to kind of have your finger on that pulse if you're looking in that direction, though you don't need to know the whole country, right? You just need to know kind of where you're going to be.
Yeah. And the legal stuff has also progressed a lot kind of in the favor of tiny houses. Yeah. States and cities passing tiny house friendly ordinances. Mm-hmm. It's a double-edged sword, of course, because with increased regulation, it makes your build more complicated and probably increases the cost of doing so.
Sure.
But it comes at the to the benefit of you, because then you can potentially be living, 100% legally in a house rather mm-hmm. than kind of when I was doing it, it was more of a like, let's see what we can get away with. Let's kind of hide out in the backyard here. And we're going to just do it however, I'm going to build it however I want to build it. Not really, I tried to build as close to building code as I could. Mm-hmm. Although at that time there was no building code that would say that a 140 square foot house with a loft, a ladder access loft would be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we flew under the radar too. So
Mhm.
when we built ours, there wasn't in our municipality where our tiny house is out west in New Mexico, they had a box on the permit application, but there
Mhm.
wasn't any way to certify, right? NOAA, the certifying body, was just getting
Yep.
started at that
Yep.
point. And so there wasn't really any way to get a certificate of occupancy or to verify the building. And so,
Yeah.
and we built it in another state, which is a complicated thing with tiny house on wheels. You know, oftentimes you build it in another state from where you want to park it. And so it's, it gets kind of complicated when you cross borders. But of
Yeah.
course, now things
Absolutely.
have changed so much, that you
Mhm.
can at least do some research and figure out how to get
Right.
as close to the rules as you can.
Yeah.
So you used your tiny lifestyle to sort of pivot yourself out of this career track that you felt like was not a good match for you. And as you
Yep.
look back on your life and that pivot and that jump into entrepreneurship and kind of going, both feet into tiny living and creating your
Mhm.
own business, how do you view that now, kind of many years down the road?
I mean, just with gratitude and happiness, I can't imagine a different path. I mean, I can imagine a path where I stayed kind of in that corporate career and did it and kind of got increasingly more kind of bitter about it. Um, but I didn't. And so, I think that in a lot of ways, I feel like I cheated the system because, um, you know, I have time like only like retired people have time. And I mean, I do work, but like there's a certain flexibility that the tiny house brought to my life, and that kind of living tiny, having my own business just like allows me to kind of, in a lot of ways, it makes your life a lot easier. It's like you don't have to go grocery shopping at 6 o'clock when everybody is grocery shopping. You don't have to like go to the store, go to the post office. It's just like all these little paper cuts that come along with working that 9 to 5 that, if you are able to reduce your expenses a lot and, adjust your work schedule accordingly, then you really gain a lot of quality time back in your life.
Yes. And as you know, my podcast is focused around financial security.
Yep.
And really what I'm, driving for is financial autonomy, which is
Mm.
choice, right?
Yep.
Enough money to
Yep.
make choices about your life, which is what you have done, and making choices about your time. And wealth is so much more than the money in your bank. It is your
Yeah.
time. It is your human capital. It is your energy. It is your attention, like all of
Absolutely.
those pieces. And so do you feel like your tiny lifestyle has like increased your wealth across all those domains?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Across
Yep.
all the domains, the
Yeah.
time, the flexibility, and financially. I mean, it's pretty darn affordable.
Yeah, awesome. So for people that are still on the fence, I know you're speaking to them with all of your content and your podcast, but people, the hardest thing is getting started sometimes, right? So
Yeah.
what is your one piece of advice for people that are still like, I'm not sure if I can do this?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of different things. If you're just not sure that you could live in a tiny house, I encourage people there are lots of tiny houses on Airbnb, and you're going to pay a pretty penny to stay in one. But I would encourage you to, find a tiny house near you and book it and stay in it for the weekend and just see how that feels.
Mm-hmm.
That can help get over that kind of fear.
Mm-hmm.
I would say from a building perspective, if you're thinking about building it yourself, to try to attend a workshop. Workshops are wonderful, allowing you to get your hands on materials, on tools, see what it's like building, but also will connect you with other people who are in the same space as you. So kind of give you almost an accountability circle of folks who are kind of at the same point in their journey. And it's unfortunate because there aren't a ton of hands-on building workshops anymore. Deke Diedrichson is a friend of the show, and he does awesome build workshops. I think he's got one coming up this summer in Vermont called Tiny House Summer Camp. But another great one is see if you can volunteer for a local Habitat Humanity and help out on a build, because doing construction is definitely physically, emotionally taxing, tiring, and if you can get a sense of what it's like before you buy that trailer, then that would probably help serve your research process.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I think that once you accomplish, you put the hammer in your hand for the first time and you see you can do it, right? Then you build a little bit of confidence to take the next step. And oftentimes people just come from a place of no exposure whatsoever. And so it can seem really scary to do something that you've never done before.
Yep, exactly.
So Ethan, thanks for sharing all of that really important information and your backstory. How awesome. And now would you tell us all the places that we can follow you and see your work?
Sure. Well, my website it should be pretty easy to remember. It's thetinyhouse.net. And there you'll find all of my stuff. But if you are a podcast listener, and I'm assuming that you are since you're listening to this now, my show is called Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, and it's in all the directories. So whatever app you're using to listen to this show, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., you'll find Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast there. And I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, Ethan, thank you again for being on Less House, More Moolah. And we're so excited to continue to follow you and learn from you on the logistics and all the things. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Laura.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Less House, More Moolah. To access valuable financial tips and resources tailored to your tiny living journey, join our exclusive community at thetinyhouseadvisor.com. Here you'll find a supportive network of like-minded individuals committed to helping each other navigate the challenges and celebrate the victories of embracing a minimalist lifestyle. So don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of this empowering tribe. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for another insightful episode of Less House, More Moolah, where we'll continue to explore practical solutions and inspiring stories to help you create the life you've always dreamed of.
Please see the show notes for important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC and this episode.